Hi, and welcome to Chapter 6 for Global Business, Investing Abroad Directly. Remember that the last chapter we covered trading internationally for part 2 of the textbook. So we're about halfway through part 2 now, right? Investing abroad directly is what we are. Foreign direct investment is going to be a big focus. And this is under part 2, acquiring the tools. Then we have 2 more chapters under part 2. We'll look at foreign exchange in the next chapter, and then capitalizing on regional integration on chapter 8, which is going to be really exciting. It has to do with trade blocks, etc. And then that'll take care of part 2 of the book. All right, let's get going by looking at the learning outcome for this lecture. We'll look at several things here. The first thing we'll look at is just the terms of associated with foreign direct investment. We'll look at what FDI is, and there's a lot of different ways of measuring it. We'll look at that. And then, because remember, this is also a theme we had discussed for every chapter, right? To look at the resource-based and institution-based views to answer why FDI takes place in the first place, right? The notion of win-win for all of these countries. Explain how FDI results in ownership advantage. Identify the ways your firm can acquire and neutralize location of advantage. So here we'll talk about, again, ownership advantage, and then we'll look at location advantage. And after that, we'll look at internalization. What are the benefits of internalizing basically a division overseas, right? So this is not internationalization, this is internalization, to internalize a division. And we'll look at that. Identify different political views on FDI and understand the benefits and costs to host and to home country. So we'll see what that looks like. And then lastly, the 3 things you need to do as your firm considers foreign direct investment. To get started, I want to make sure that we cover a little bit the opening case of your author on page 87. As always, I'm asking that you please read the chapter prior to reviewing the lectures. You'll get so much more out of the lectures, even if you skim the chapter, but just familiarize yourself with the content of the chapter, since the slides really are here to summarize part of the chapter, but importantly to also help make sense of the content. All right, so now on page 87, the opening case is about Nordic multinationals, right? What I wanted to do here is, highlight the countries that your author discussed in the Nordic multinationals with current population. So Sweden is the most populous at 10.2 million. Denmark 5.8, Finland 5, and so basically all 5 except for Sweden. That's about twice the population of the others. So not super populated. In fact, compared to LA County's got 10 million people. So, just think about that for a second. LA County, just Los Angeles County, twice the size of Denmark, Finland, Norway when it comes to population. And as big a population as the entire country of Sweden. So why am I doing this? Well, what you find out as you start the opening case is that these Nordic countries have been very, very smart with the multinationals there. Multinational enterprises have been very clever about cooperating, about working together so that they can leverage themselves to take better advantage of opportunities outside the area, right? Just look at the population alone. That's not a lot of people. And so if you want to grow, obviously you have to go outside the Nordic areas. And so what is that going to look like? Well, first, what's special about those multinational enterprises? They're known for innovation. They really, what your author reminds us of is how much money they spent and how much focus they have when it comes to innovation. Decisions are made based on consensus. Consensus-based management promotes trust and cooperation. That's not true of everywhere. And in this case, consensus goes beyond internal management decision, as we learn that these companies, work with other companies and across other Nordic countries. There's a lot of cooperation. And then there's a passion for replacing labor with machine. That's how you become efficient with such small populations and a high yield for productivity. That's going to have to be done with just technology whenever possible. Now, what I've done here is I've highlighted, in this particular case, Norway. And there's a clear reason. That's the Norwegian flag. And over here, what I have for you from the World Bank, and here's the link, is the latest GDP of Norway. So we're talking about only $403 billion, not even $1 trillion economy, right? And so that's for the current GDP of Norway. But here's what's super special about Norway. It's sovereign wealth fund, right? So Norway has its own investment tool, and that investment tool is a sovereign wealth fund. And so the fund in this particular case is this, right? This is a Norges Bank Investment Management. And in Norwegian kroners, that's $10 trillion market value. And so we'll convert that to dollars in just a second. But let me just kind of show you a little bit about this investment fund. This is the investment arm of Norway. And what it's, again, doing is it's capitalizing on the revenue from oil and gas, by the way, oil and gas resources in the North Sea. But instead of just wasting the cash, what the government's done is it's reinvested the cash, right? Now, you saw, in this case, very small population. What would it mean if you reinvested the cash in Norway? Not a lot, because the growth is surely greater outside of Norway. There's 7 billion people on this planet, 200 countries. And so, again, that's 9,200 companies, 74 countries, and it's the world's largest fund, by the way. You can see all the investment. There's a lot of transparency, by the way. This is a benchmark fund. You can see exactly what they spend the money on, what they don't spend the money on. I told you I would show you in dollars, and here's what's amazing. What's amazing is that the fund is worth $1 billion. This is a country that has an investment arm where it's generated twice the amount of its entire GDP. That's astounding. There is no other country like that. You could say that in this case, Norway runs a profit. It's a profitable country. Obviously I'm oversimplifying it, but just looking at the numbers. The investment insights. So again, there's a lot of stuff you could look at here. Let's look at what that means, responsible investment in their case. Long-term growth. And so how do you do that, right? So they talk about the principles, etc., what companies they invested, but also what companies they don't invest in, right? And so this is company divestment, right? These are nuclear power plants here in the pictures. So they have ethical exclusion and risk-based divestment. And so if you want to see, for example, all the excluded companies, there's a list. There you go. And there's a reason. So coal-based is out, which is ironic considering, of course, this is a fund that comes from oil and natural gas, but who's judging? Look at this, nuclear, right? So coal, nuclear, any dirty stuff, right? Dirty fuel, tobacco, nuclear weapons. Sometimes it's, in this particular case here with Brazil, severe violations of human rights, excluded this year, by the way. So anyway, just wanted to show you this so that you can get a little bit more out of that. Now, since we've done this, and your author reminds us, and they also reminded us through their fund that it is indeed the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world, I want to kind of qualify that a little bit for you. And the way I'm going to qualify that is by, to the horror of my colleagues in English, yes, I am using Wikipedia, verboten in many classes. But what I'm going to do here is show you again Norway. Yes, number one, came out 97, oil and gas worth $1 billion. There we go. That's the only $1 billion one, right? I'm sorry, $1 trillion. What am I saying? $1 trillion, not billion. That's billion. 941 billion. That's 1 trillion. But for fun, why don't we look at this a different way? Why don't we look at this by country? And now what you see is that China Investment Corp is number 2 at 941, but we have 3 investment funds out of China. The second one is $743 billion. And so as a country, China has the most sovereign wealth fund, or the biggest value in sovereign wealth fund on the planet. Now I know many of you are thinking, USA, what about us? What about us? There you go. The US as a nation does not have a sovereign wealth fund, but some states do, right? So California, we don't have one. But if you look at all the sovereign wealth funds here, it looks as though, there we go. Alaska has got the biggest one, right? $64 billion that comes from oil and gas. I believe Texas has the oldest one, 1854. Look at that. 1854, land and mineral royalties at $48 billion. So just wanted to kind of bring you up to speed on that one. All right, let's get going with the content of the chapter with international investment. There's just 2 ways to go when you want to invest internationally. Number 1, foreign portfolio investment, FPI. Here's what you need to know about that. It's indirect investment. It might as well be foreign indirect investment. You don't have control here on this one the way you do with foreign direct investment. You're holding securities of firms in other countries, but without controlling interest. Again, very important. But remember, it's a portfolio, and it's great. You're generating income, but you don't have control, which maybe doesn't matter to you. Foreign direct investment, you're investing stake of 10% or more. And what that's going to do is it's going to give you the ability to exercise management control right. So that's the difference there. So now we've kind of looked at this. Just know that as we look at FDI and we look at the different types of FDI, just remember that FDI can mean, yes, I'm going to open up a factory somewhere else and spend a lot of money to make, just build the plant, the logistics around it, the infrastructure, all that stuff, the training, that's a lot of money. And so that's a form of FDI. But also cold cash, right, is a form of FDI. Maybe you want to invest a percentage in another multinational somewhere, or investment fund or something. So FDI comes in many forms. So let's look now at types of foreign direct investment. First, you got the horizontal, which in this case, a firm produces the same product or offers the same service in a host country as at home. So remember, when we talk about the home country, that's your home, and the host is wherever you are outside of your home. And so in this particular case, the example that your author uses is BMW. So BMW, Bavarian Motor Works in Munich, the capital of Bavaria, southern Germany. And so BMW is very much German, made in German. And so in this case, if this particular company, BMW, decided to have the final assembly in the UK, in England, that would be an example of horizontal FDI. It's got an assembly in Germany, and it's got another assembly in the UK, horizontal. For vertical, you're going upstream or downstream in different value chains of the host country. Upstream, you engage in an upstream stage of the value chain. So there could be some components, transmission or something, that you're getting in your manufacturing in another country, that would be upstream vertical FDI. Downstream would be, your the marketing, the selling of the car in another country. You have a dealership there. And so that would be downstream. So let's see what we have here. Following your book, by the way, this is page 89. So horizontal FDI, there we go, BMW, home country, final assembly in Germany. Example of horizontal FDI, boom, final assembly also in the host country, the UK. We're done, easy peasy. Now let's look at vertical. For vertical, same format. We still have BMW, Germany, final assembly, but we're doing things a little bit different. We're getting our components from Russia. And so in this case, that would be an example of the upstream vertical FDI. For downstream, we have dealerships in Egypt. So that would be an example of the downstream vertical FDI. So now we've looked at the types of FDI, right? Let's look at FDI flow versus stock. So first, let's look at flow. That's the amount of the FDI moving in a given period in a certain direction, right? So, when you have Procter & Gamble maybe opening up a center, a factory somewhere in India, that would be, in this case, for India, it would be FDI inflow. For the United States, it's an American company, it would be FDI outflow, right? So Procter & Gamble, billions of dollars spent in India, FDI is moving out of the US and in a year. And for inflow, FDI from the US moving in India in a year. So it's a picture. We're just taking a picture every year of how much is coming in overall and how much is coming in per country, or how much is going out to what countries, right? Now, another way of looking at this is stock, FDI stock. And now I'm looking at the total accumulation of inbound FDI in a country or outbound FDI from a country across a given period of time. Now I'm really looking at the big numbers. What I wanted to do for you over here is to kind of give you a little bit of an update from obviously 2020, where with all the stuff that's been going on with the pandemic. And so this is from the UN CTAD, and they track the stuff. This is probably your best source for tracking foreign direct investment. And so first, let's look at global investment flows from 2019. So the top 10 host economies, 2018 and 2019 in billions of dollars, USA, right? So still number one. Notice though, it's tiny little drop there from 18 to 19 in billions of dollars, a 1% drop, but still number one. China, it's on par. Look at that. From year to year, FDI inflow into China has not changed. Singapore is yielding one of the, in fact, I believe the second biggest growth here. So even though there's way more FDI year to year, the growth is 42%. Let me take you to the bottom. Germany doesn't get a lot of FDI, but from 18 to 19, the FDI jumped 232 compared to the previous year, percent, right there. And so again, Singapore is number 3, Brazil, UK. It's going to be very, very interesting. You see UK dropping 6 already to see what happens with the UK at the end of the year and next year, now that the United Kingdom has left the European Union. We'll talk more about Brexit later. Hong Kong, China, there we go. Major drop year to year. France has gone up 40%. And let's see, India and Canada. So again, just giving you, I mean, it's fascinating. Look at India. India is still a developing economy, right? The BRICS, remember the BRICS, Brazil, right? Russia is not on the list, India, and of course, China. And so now, having said that, let me kind of take you to the right there. So this is where we are, right? United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. And this is also what I wanted to show you, FDI inflow, global and by group economies, 2008 through 2019 in billions of dollars, right? This is for the whole world, and this is for developed economies. The reason I'm showing you this is from 2000 to 2019. It's all about the developing economies, people. That's where the action is. You see that right there? And so you're seeing more and more over here in this case of the developing economies in terms of trade. This was on the slide, right? Now, global investment flow update for today, 2020. Let's see what we got. It's ugly. You know it's going to be ugly, right? So it starts with early warning signs. And what you have here is showing you from 2015, right? And remember that this is where again, the lowest financial crisis, the point in 2009, was right here for FDI inflow worldwide, right? So this is inflow into countries worldwide. The peak was $2 trillion in 2015. So from 2009, this is where the party really hit an all-time high in 2015. And then what you have is 2019, there we go, $1.5 trillion, negative 40%. But look at the projections, right? The projections, this is going to be worse than what we experienced right after the global financial crisis. This will be 2021. It will be ugly. So let's look at short-term, long-term. 2020, FDI stuck in the lockdown. There's a slowdown of implementation of ongoing projects due to closures of sites, but also slowdowns in cross-border mergers and acquisition, new project starts. And with tightening margins for investment, automated effect on reinvested earnings, which is a key component of FDI and about 50% average worldwide. Again, you can see where the years, the long-term effect, are showing you over years how this is going to play out. This is hindered by new investment restrictions, again, a reduction in cross-border mergers and acquisitions, and navigating severe global economic recession, which some people are predicting right around here is going to really, really hit, if not sooner, shelving projects and a drop in investment decisions. And then finally heading towards increased supply chain resilience and higher degree of autonomy, divestment, reshoring, diversion, and we eventually get back on our feet around 2030, right? Let's hope they're all wrong. All right, moving along. This was an update that I thought was critical. Wanted to show you this update, especially considering where we are now. Now let's go with MNE versus non-MNE. So multinational enterprise, aka multinational corporations, if you will, versus non-multinational, right? So an MNE is a firm that engages in foreign direct investment when doing business abroad, done. But a non-MNE, they do business abroad by exporting and importing and licensing and franchising, outsourcing, or even in FPI, right? Foreign portfolio investment, which remember is non-direct. And so big differences here. You can probably already guess what the pros and cons are, right? What would be good about me? Let's say I'm building locomotive. Let's say there's a demand for locomotives in Brazil, one of the hottest markets in South America. Well, the hottest markets in South America, at least looking at GDP. But firms that engage in FDI when doing business abroad, let's say that you have a choice. You can export locomotives, you can license locomotives, franchise them, outsource them, maybe engage in some FPI by buying a bunch of shares in some Brazilian locomotive manufacturing company. Or I can just build a plant there. I can build a plant there, teach people how to make locomotives, and make locomotives there. By the way, from big, huge parts that I do export to Brazil, but are not subject to any tariffs or any restrictions because I'm assembling them there. Well, I'm giving you a real example of what General Electric did with its locomotive divisions in Brazil. It was FDI. And then we'll talk about, we'll do even more later on about what the shortfalls of non-MNEs in this case. All right, so the reasons for firms to engage in FDI are OLI, right? So OLI, all of that stuff is going to lead to key reasons why firms engage in FDI. And by the way, it's just kind of all of the above, right? It's not just one thing, it's all O, L, and I. So the first one is going to be there's advantages when you own things. Case in point, I just gave you GE in Brazil with locomotives, not subject to tariffs, right? Location advantage is another one. Brazil is struggling a little bit lately, but for a while it's just smoking hot. It was growing like crazy, and so that's when, in fact, GE got involved, and there were huge advantages to making locomotives there. More importantly, they internalized the process, right? So by doing that, as I just said, the advantage of internalizing is that whatever happens with the current leadership there, restrictions or not, because now GE has a division there, a strategic business unit in Brazil, it will not have to worry about tariffs because it's just basically, essentially, quote unquote, a Brazilian company. All right, so let's now look at each of the three elements of OLI as we move forward. By the way, OLI, suggested by British scholar John Dunning. I want to give him credit. John Dunning came up with that. Let's see. Benefits of direct ownership. So again, we're starting over here. Ownership advantage. It lies in the combination of equity ownership rights and management control rights. There you go. Hey, it's yours and you get to make decisions. Ownership rights provide the management control rights. Foreign direct investment facilitates firm-specific resources and capabilities abroad to overcome foreign liabilities. Again, I just discussed that with my GE example. Now, why do firms prefer FDI to licensing? Now it's getting really interesting, right? And so, again, going back a little bit, if we go back to, right here, licensing is a non-MNE, right? And so now we're asking the question, FDI, what's going on with reducing, FDI as opposed to licensing? Well, the first one is dissemination risk. There's a very, very famous case that your author references of Pizza Hut. So once upon a time, Pizza Hut decided to penetrate the Thai market with its pizza. And it did this with franchising. So several Thai business people bought into the Pizza Hut franchise. Funny story, they learned that it was not that complicated to run a Pizza Hut or any pizza franchise really, and decided to make their own called the Pizza Company. Obviously, Pizza Hut sued where? In Thai court, obviously, and Pizza Hut lost. Today, the biggest pizza chain in Thailand is called The Pizza Company, made up of former franchisees of Pizza Hut. So there's your dissemination risk. You taught the locals how to do this thing, but you didn't control it, and now you give it away. If it was yours from the beginning, if they were your stores and you had, even if you employed people there, now it's a completely different story. You're not trying to just protect copyrights on a franchise. FDI provides tight control over foreign operations. There's an example here from your author that I really like about Starbucks. Starbucks entered South Korea by licensing its format to ESCO. Although ESCO soon opened 10 stores, Starbucks felt that ESCO was not aggressive enough in growing the chain. But without foreign direct investment, there was little Starbucks could do. Eventually, Starbucks switched from licensing to foreign direct investment, which allowed it to directly promote the more aggressive growth of the chain in South Korea. This is on page 91. Fascinating. So Starbucks regained control over foreign operations because the problem is if growth was too slow, you open a window of opportunity for a competitor to seize. FDI facilitates the transfer of tacit knowledge through learn by doing. Tacit knowledge is one of those things, it's just fascinating. It's a little bit tricky to really wrap your head around because it's one of those things that's not super tangible. So you have two types of knowledge, right? You're going to have explicit knowledge and you're going to have tacit knowledge. Explicit knowledge is super easy, it's codifiable, right? So basically anything you can learn from a manual, from a book, is called explicit knowledge. but does it mean you really know it? Does it mean you really learn it, right? The example I've heard before is riding a bike. Can you imagine giving someone a manual on how to ride a bike and not really going to help, right? You have to be there, you have to correct, you have to explain, do this now, etc. Well, it's the same in business, right? So I can, in fact, one of my favorite books is The Toyota Way, which was written by a consultant about basically Toyota. And it's such a great read because you really start to appreciate how even if Toyota decided to open up a factory in any country and give everybody all the computer programs and all the books and all the manuals, without any training, the reliability of the product would never be the same. It takes years. And that's the kind of knowledge that you transfer through tacit knowledge, right? It's the one that cannot be codified. So anyway, there you have it. So that's another reason why they prefer FDI over licensing. Okay, now we're getting into going back to the OLI. We're getting to number 2, location, location, location. So location advantage is something called agglomeration. Look at all these brands, right? Let's see, Tesla, Google, Cisco, Intel, Netflix. By the way, I just ran out of time and space, but there's tons. Oh, Apple. What do they all have in common, right? What do they have in common? You might think technology, but okay, Tesla, automaker, yeah. The rest of them, fine. Well, what they all have in common is they're located in the same place. Not just the US, not just California. That's right, California, number 1. But they also are all located in Silicon Valley. That's why, by the way, Microsoft's not there, right? Washington State. And so that's what we call agglomeration. It's a clustering of economic activities in certain location. I mean, think about Elon Musk with Tesla. You know, he could have gone anywhere, but he did, kept the company in Palo Alto, right? Silicon Valley. And maybe you can understand why the dashboard of the first Tesla changed everything. All these cars now are imitating the dashboard of the Tesla with what looks like a ginormous iPad there and not even any buttons. Well, it's kind of easier to develop when you have a bunch of scientists and engineers in Silicon Valley who can help you do that. And so the diffusion of knowledge from one firm to others among closely located firms and industry demand that creates a skilled labor force. I could have given you tons of examples. Your author does. I just thought this would be one that, you've all heard of Silicon Valley. Moving on. Industry demand also that facilitates a pool of specialized suppliers and buyers in that region is what helps create agglomeration. Now, acquiring and neutralizing location advantage. So we still are on that OLI and we're still doing location, but we're talking about how do you acquire the location advantage and how do you neutralize the location advantage. So first, it's obtained by a firm when operating in a location owing to its firm's specific capabilities. When a firm enters a foreign country through foreign direct investment, its competitors are likely to increase FDI in the host country. And so this is where, there's a whole thing about first mover advantage. We'll talk more about that. There's even something called second mover advantage, by the way. We'll also talk about that. But in this particular case, it's when your rivals hope to acquire or neutralize location advantage that you need to really start to worry. Mostly followed by oligopolistic industries. Case in point from your author was the auto industry FDI in Brazil and Mexico. Fascinating in focus case study on page 93. And so that's why I put that samba there. This is a 1972 V-dub samba. Look at how beautiful it is. It's just the sweetest. Well, what's special about that samba is it's a Brazilian made. And if you know about the sambas, the 23 windows, in the US they stopped making them, I believe in 1970, but they kept making them in 72 in Brazil. Thank goodness. So anyway, Auto industry in Brazil and Mexico, yes, VW, Volkswagen has been making cars in Brazil for quite some time. And that has, over the years, really led to a lot of other companies making cars in Brazil and Mexico with very, very different markets, by the way, and different reasons for making cars, as you will learn when you read the case on page 93. Please read it. Let's see. Let's move on to advantages of internalization. So now we've kind of, moved a little bit here where, remember, let me go back a little bit. We were doing this, weren't we? We were talking about the OLI. And okay, now that we've talked about the OLI and we've talked about location for a couple slides, we're getting into the third one, internalizing. And what are the advantages of you internalizing operations overseas? And so the advantages are here going to be domestic transaction costs are cheaper than international transaction costs. There is a premium you're going to pay if you're coming in as a foreign entity into another country. We're not even just talking about tariffs over here. We're talking about just transaction costs. And so by being a local, quote unquote, now it's cheaper for you. It combats market failure by replacing the external market with in-house links, right? So international trade between two independent firms in two countries is transformed now into just intra-firm trade between the same company located in two different places. So that's the advantage there. So again, when you're looking at OLI, ownership and location, obviously leading to the advantages of internalization. It's all three are the main reasons for that. Honda, right? Honda famously was the first Japanese companies to open up a factory, a manufacturing plant in the United States. And all of these three reasons were key reasons. And of course, the advantage for Honda of internalizing, one more time, was so that it would not be subject to restrictive or punitive tariffs, etc., right? Quotas. Okay, now we've talked about what is FDI, we talked about the reasons for, and now let's talk about the politics and the political views on foreign direct investment. Think about what we've talked about, right? Think about, in fact, here we are, 2020, we have an election coming up. And, invariably, both candidates are probably going to do what candidates do of all sides every 4 years when they run, which is talk about America, right? Both sides are going to talk about bringing jobs back to America or helping manufacturing more, etc., etc. And so what does that mean? What it does is it does create an environment of uncertainty for foreign direct investment, where foreign entities are going to stand by and kind of wait a little bit before they decide to open up a factory in the US, thinking, maybe that's not going to work out for me. So the political views, there's the radical view. That's the first one, where FDI is an instrument of imperialism and a vehicle for foreign exploitation. This was, I feel like I'm quoting from Hugo Chavez, right? When he was still alive, a former president of Venezuela. Every reference he made to multinationals, usually he invoked the word imperialismo. And so that was one of the big tenets of the radical view of Hugo Chavez, which is still alive today, by the way, in Venezuela. But interestingly, it's kind of, showed up in other places. Argentina, right? When Kirchner was the president, and really, in fact, basically took over foreign businesses, foreign multinationals. There is I believe, banks, oil companies from Spain, where Argentina just basically said, "We'll take it." And so, if you were thinking about opening up a business in Argentina, having a factory, you might think twice right now, thinking like, I just don't know if this is a good idea because they're going to confiscate, right? They're going to nationalize. And so that's a radical view, of those governments, right? Government nationalized multinational enterprise assets or bounds inbound multinational enterprises. Again, the intentions, fine, they're noble, great. Let's support the local businesses. There's so many unintended consequences with that, and one of the main unintended consequences is the realization that yes, there is over 7 billion people on the planet, and unless you don't want your industry to be competitive in the world, they're not going to be able to export anything outside your border, because obviously you're not a specialist. If your industry is inferior to foreign industries because of cost, transportation, research and development, reinvestments in technology, etc., 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 then you're just not competitive and it's not your thing anymore, and you should focus on something else. So that's for the first one. The political views, number 2. There's the free market view. When FDI is unrestricted by government intervention, it enables countries to tap into their absolute and comparative advantage. I always, right away, when I read that, I think about the usual suspects. I talked about them before. Let's see if you can remember that. Remember them. These are the most open economies on the planet, right? These are the economies that have basically the same rules for foreign enterprises coming into their market than for their own enterprises. We call that the Economic Freedom Index. So at the very, very top, depending on the time of day, by the way, it's usually going to be Hong Kong and Singapore, or Singapore and Hong Kong. I believe last we checked, Singapore was number 1. And then also you have New Zealand, you have Switzerland up there. And so these countries, we can't really fully say that Hong Kong, by the way, which is technically a part of China, has a free market view, because there's going to be some rules, but it definitely is one of the most liberalized when it comes to foreign direct investment. By specializing in the production of certain goods and services is how they get their absolute and or comparative advantage. Remember Adam Smith, right, and all that. David Ricardo with the comparative. A little review. All right, now let's go with the pragmatic nationalism. Foreign direct investment is approved only when its benefits outweigh its cost. This is basically embraced by most countries, right? Of course, I talked about Venezuela, I talked about Argentina. Most countries are engaged in some level of pragmatic nationalism. There's so many examples I could give you here. I don't know, the one that always comes to mind for me was when there was a company, when George Bush Jr. was the president of the United States. There was a company out of, I believe, Dubai that was positioning itself to buy the Port Authority on the West Coast. The Port Authority is run by a corporation. And many senators had a problem with that because of country of origin. They thought, no, we don't want, in this case, they argued against a Middle Eastern company coming in and buying, port authorities, thinking, what if they let stuff go by? And so even though the president had kind of blessed this whole thing, he was embarrassed by having to basically kind of get involved, and eventually the elegant solution was that the interested buyer changed its mind, and that way it never happened. All right, so what are the effects of foreign direct investment on home and host country? So here's what you need to remember. The host country is the country where you are operating, and of course the home country is your own country of origin. So let's start with cell 1. So what are the benefits for the host country? What are the benefits for the country where you are operating? Yes, they're getting cash, right? Here you are. Let's use the example I gave you earlier, Procter & Gamble in India. So you've got Procter & Gamble with a bunch of factories in India. That's cash coming in. Technology. Maybe they're benefiting by looking at some of the manufacturing processes from Procter & Gamble, one of the leaders on the planet, and technology inflows coming in. Management know-how, perhaps. Job creation. A lot of people here in India are getting new jobs, right? Well, you can pretty much flip this on its head with the costs, right? So what are the costs in the host country? So what's the cost for India? Some loss of sovereignty. You have to give up on some things. You've allowed a foreign multinational. Now, in this case, we're talking about India, the biggest democracy on the planet with over 1 billion people. Soon it will have more people than China. It's growing faster. India is a sleeping giant. It's a sleeping tiger. Eventually, just watch out. So it has to agree to lose some sovereignty, which, by the way, your author has a great case on that as well. I believe, yes, it's the 98, page 98, welcoming versus restricting sovereign wealth fund investment. Case in point here for India. And so competition. Oh no, I have foreign competition coming into my country. That's bad for me. You know what? I mean, for those of you out there who are athletes, imagine if you're the strongest person on your team. Imagine if this is track and there's no one faster than you are. Are you going to improve during workouts if there's no one really pushing you, right? Don't you want that competition to make you better? And of course, the worst one here is capital outflow, where that foreign entity, Procter & Gamble, might just take out all that cash it's making in India and bring it back to the US. And that's where a lot of countries have all kinds of rules about that. Now for the home country. So, okay, let's start with the benefits for the home country. So we're still with the United States, Procter & Gamble. Earnings, there we go. We got money coming from India into the US for Procter & Gamble. Way to go, Procter & Gamble. Exports. There are components that will be exported from the US to India to make the products, right? So there's that. And learning from abroad. I'm going to learn for sure how to operate in that market, in that region. And that's gold because it'll help me with my other divisions. Again, you can flip the thing on its head with what's the cost? The cost for the United States is capital outflow because those millions of dollars, even though you're getting the earnings back from the sales in India, the capital that it took to invest in building the factory over there, that's capital outflow. That's gone, right? And of course, job loss. That was a big deal when obviously the free trade agreement between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico, once upon a time called the North American Free Trade Agreement, and now called the USMCA, right? That's the new name of NAFTA. Not popular in all circles because of job loss, right? When there used to be people in the U.S. who assembled a washing machine, and now those washing machines, the company decides it's cheaper just to have a factory somewhere, maybe in Mexico, or make cars in Canada. Henry Ford actually started making cars in Canada in the very, very early 1900s. That's how far back this thing goes. And so, yes, there was opportunity there, but it means that we're not making it. And so there's a cost-benefit analysis. Do you want to keep the job and not be competitive and not be able to export the car because in this particular case, maybe it's going to be more expensive to make and you're not competitive? Or you bring back the earnings from selling that car overseas and then you focus on the things that you specialize in, and basically those other types of jobs you have to retool, relearn, and jobs given to other people. It's still, if you're 55-year-old and you've 5 years close to retirement and the company shuts down, that's just horrible. And not everybody's going to want to go back to community college and learn about, cybersecurity because that's where the jobs are. All right, let's see. What are the implications for action? So here we go. We are now looking at the very last part of the chapter for implications for action. Number one, carefully assess whether foreign direct investment is justified in light of other foreign entry modes, such as outsourcing or licensing. Sometimes, if you're not really able to when we look at the reasons to engage in FDI, right? Again, ownership advantage, location advantage, internalization advantage. If you don't need all of the above, maybe you should outsource. So maybe you should have licenses. All kinds of other types of agreements available to you. And by the way, we'll talk about them down the line. We'll spend a lot of time on the other types of agreement that are either equity or not equity-based agreements. And then pay careful attention to the location advantage in combination with the firm's strategic goals. It's fascinating. I want to say Bank of America. Yes, Bank of America was the first American bank to to purchase or invest, I should say, in a Chinese bank. It was the first American bank to have a presence in China. It was fascinating because a lot of other banks thought, oh no, if B of A is doing it, we have to do it too. So they followed suit. Well, the first bank to pull out of China was B of A, and a lot of other companies followed suit after that. So make sure that you're really not doing it just because your competitor is doing it, but because it's the right strategy for you under the right terms. If you remember from the previous chapter, think about the sacrifice that Disney had to make to penetrate China. The biggest sacrifice, if you remember, was to give up control of Disney with less than a 50% stake in Disney China, right? Lastly, be aware of the institutional constraints and enablers governing foreign direct investment and enhance legitimacy in host countries. Lastly, let's look at the debate, welcome versus restrict sovereign wealth fund investment. It's kind of a no-brainer. I think most students who are in global business, have no problem with why it's a good idea to bring money into the United States. And so that's, again, foreign direct investment. In fact, 60 Minutes did a fascinating piece, if you can find it, on sovereign wealth fund after the financial crisis. And that's when you learn that it was China that really dropped billions and billions of dollars into our economy right after the financial crisis. And a lot of people would say really help us recover from this thing. So struggling firms are provided with much needed cash. That's how you welcome sovereign wealth funds. And restricting sovereign wealth concerns are raised over national security. They may be politically motivated, and maybe there's that inadequate transparency. Of course, I told you the benchmark is the Norwegian sovereign wealth fund, but not all sovereign wealth funds are that transparent that you can go to a website like I just showed you and see everything they invested and how much of it and why and where and how. All right, well, this concludes the chapter. As always, make sure you get your key terms and summaries out of the way. We've covered everything here. Again, I know some of you have asked me what's the best way to study. I personally have always been a big fan of flashcards. That's how I studied in college. Get the definitions out of the way, and then make sure that when you look at the summary and understand why and how things work. That's it for it. Wow, just under an hour. I was really hoping that this one would be less than an hour for you guys. It's a lot of stuff. And get ready for dealing with foreign exchange. It's a really, really fun chapter. I can't wait for us to go over it. See you guys next week.